What is up, everybody? And today I'm bringing you guys a new tutorial series. We're going to make a mini game in Unity, a little cannon shooting mini game where we knock over some barrels. This is a very basic tutorial. This is for beginners. We're just going to go over basic things like how to make a prefab, materials, things like that. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and sit back, enjoy the video, and you guys have a great day. So since this is a beginner tutorial, we're just going to start out at the very basics. So to create a project, you hit this little arrow drop down and you select the version of Unity you want to use. And for this tutorial, we're going to go with the universal render pipeline. Go ahead and name it whatever you want. We're just going to name this Cannon Minigame Tutorial. Now, once that loads, it's going to bring you into this little sample scene that Unity has set up on by default. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go into scenes and we're going to want to create a new scene. Let's just go ahead and name it level 1. Open that up. So then in the project settings, or excuse me, not the project settings, the lighting settings, go ahead and you can get to that by going Window, Rendering, Lighting. Go ahead and select this little circle to the right of the lighting settings and hit sample scene settings. So what this will do is it'll just make the lighting a bit softer and easier to work with in this setting. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and organize our folders a little bit just to make this easier to work with. So go ahead and create a new folder and call it example scene assets. And we're just going to put everything that was from that first scene in here, so we don't have to worry about it. So go ahead and select the example scenes, materials, presets, scripts, and tutorial info, and the readme, and drag that into the example scene assets. And now we're ready to begin. So go ahead and create a new folder, and let's call this scripts. Go ahead and create another folder, call this materials, and we should be good for the moment. Well, actually, let's go ahead and create one more folder and call it prefabs. And if you don't know, if you're a beginner here, a prefab is just something that is a saved reference of a game object. And we'll go ahead and create one more in a minute, and that'll make more sense. So let's go ahead and create a floor for our game, and we're just going to go ahead and create a plane, and we're going to have that be at 0, 0, good. So just like this, go ahead and center that game object, and we're going to call that good. Now, in the materials folder that we have, go ahead and open that up, click a create, and hit material. We're going to create a floor material. So once again, if you're a beginner and you don't know, a material is basically something you can apply to a game object to change its color properties, put textures on it, things like that. So the only thing we're going to change about this floor material, though, is the color. Let's go ahead and give it a nice light green, kind of an unsaturated green. Drag that on there. Ooh, that's a little bit too saturated. Let's just drag that a bit to the left there. Alright, so now that we have this nice, beautiful floor, let's go ahead and make it so we can play a game. So we need some objects. We need some barrels to knock over. So let's go ahead and create a cube so we can make a platform for these barrels. Kind of center that there. And since I think this plane is a little bit too small, so let's go ahead and scale that up, maybe 5 by 5. Now we have a nice wide area to play with here. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and take this cube and move it back on the z-axis, maybe to a -10, so that our cannon has a firing range to shoot on. Move it up, maybe 5 is, that's about right, to 5. Scale the y-axis down so it's a bit smaller, the z-axis to 2, and the x-axis to maybe, let's go 10 here, so that we have a nice wide platform to set the barrels on. I'm going to go ahead and call this cube platform. Now that we have that on our platform, let's go ahead and create some barrels. So to create some barrels, we go create, we right click, create 3D object, and let's just go ahead and make some cylinders, okay? These are pretty good spots right here. Just make sure that the Z value is at a -10 so that they're evenly set up with the platform. And if that's an uneven value, you could parent it to the platform and set that Z value to 0. But we're not going to do that. So let's go ahead and call this cylinder barrel. And in our materials folder, right here, see materials, we're going to right click and create a new material. We're going to go ahead and call this barrel. Awesome. So now that we have that, go ahead and give that a nice brown color. It's a beautiful brown color. Wouldn't change it for anything. And let's scale this barrel up on the X and Y axis. Ooh, that's much too big. Maybe like a 2 and a 2. 2 and a 2 on the X and Z axis. And let's go ahead and call it 1.5 on the Y axis. And this gives us a nice big barrel to shoot at. Let's go ahead and move it over so that we can make room for a little pyramid of barrels. And this is what I was talking about with the prefabs. So to create a prefab, we don't want to have to make each barrel separately, right? When we change one barrel, we want to have that change applied to all the barrels. So to link these barrels together, we have to make something called a prefab. And to do that, you take your barrel and you just drag it down into your project folders. And see how it became this like blue thing with the blue cube and stuff? That means it's now a prefab. So I can drag this barrel into this scene as many times as I want. And if I scale this barrel like this, and I override and I apply that to all, it will change all the barrels with it, which is super duper useful. So now I'm just going to go ahead and delete these other barrels out of the scene so that we can have a little bit more consistency here. And I'm just going to duplicate this barrel. I'm just going to duplicate that barrel like so that we have 4 barrels on the bottom. And then now that we have that, I'm going to select these first 3 barrels, duplicate those, drag them up to be about there, move them over so that we're getting kind of a pyramid shape, do the same thing again, like so, delete the extra barrel, select the top 2 barrels, duplicate them, drag them up, and delete the extra barrel. So now we have this nice little pyramid of barrels and stuff. And because we want to keep our thing organized, let's just go ahead and drag them onto our platform so they're child objects of that. So once again, to make an object a child of something else, it means to parent it. So it means to make it move with that, to kind of be contained within. So to do that, we just highlight them and drag them on. So now we can see that this platform is holding all those barrels. So once again, this is a beginner tutorial, so if we're going a bit slow, sorry about that. So now that we have that, we want these barrels to actually fall. And notice that the camera too is at kind of a weird angle. So let's go ahead and fix that. So let's take the camera and move that up to, like, say, a +10. Rotate it on the y-axis to be 80. And move the position up a little bit so that we can have a nice view of these barrels in the game view. So now if we click play, we'll see that these barrels, nothing happens to them. They don't fall, there's nothing going on there. And that's because they don't have a rigid body applied to them. So to fix that, we just go ahead and click our barrel, click add component, rigid body. And this is great, that's all we have to do for that. We just now hit overrides, apply, and if we go and click on the rest of the barrels, we'll see that they all have rigid bodies applied to them. Isn't that great? So now, if we hit play, we'll see that these barrels are all doing this weird funky crap, like what the hell is going on here? We really don't want that. So, in order to fix that, what we can do is take one barrel, remove the capsule collider component, and add a mesh collider component. Make that convex. So that just means instead of taking all the points on this mesh and making a collider with it, it makes a collider just a system run faster because it doesn't have to calculate as many points. So convex is faster, but when it's not convex, it's more accurate. But this basically, this should hopefully fix the problem. Ooh, that's not ideal. Alright, and then if we go overrides, apply all, and hit that check mark, we'll see that our problem is now fixed and that these barrels are all resting nicely on top of each other. Alright, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and create a cannon that we can shoot with. So let's go ahead and create an empty, and this will be our cannon holder. So let's go ahead and call this cannon holder. And this is just going to be an empty game object that we can put the cannon objects within. And since we want this to be a little bit away on the edge of the firing range, let's just drag this to be, I don't know, what's the camera at? Let's go ahead and change the camera to be a -15. Or not -15, a +15. And maybe even a +20, there we go. And take the cannon holder, make this 18, and maybe 8 on the y-axis. Seems good to me. Then to make a child object of this, go ahead and right click on the cannon holder, click create 3D object, and let's go ahead and create a cylinder. So we can go ahead and remove the capsule collider from this cylinder, and we should rotate this cylinder on the x-axis to be a -90 degrees. That way the cylinder kind of looks a little bit more like a cannon. You can't really quite see it there, but we'll move it forward a little bit to fix that. So let's move that forward. So now you can see it, we have a cannon here, albeit kind of bad. And in fact too, we can scale this object up to maybe like 1.5, 1.5, and 1.5. Now it's a little bit bigger. Cool. So now that we have our cannon here, our nice cylinder that doesn't really do anything, we might as well apply a material to it to make it look slightly better, even though it's not a model. So let's just go ahead and create a new material and call it cannon. And let's drag that onto the cannon material. If we turn this metallic map up, this metallic map slider up, we'll see that it gets a little bit more shiny, like it's actually metal. So let's turn that up to, well, we can just turn that up to maybe like a 0.8. That'll be nice. And then if we go to our blue setting there, we can just give that a slight blue tint, and that'll make it look a little bit more metal and nice. And maybe I'll even turn it down, get it a little bit darker. Very good. And I'll just set that metallic map to be 0.6. It looks a little bit better. Awesome. So now that we have that, and we look at our game view, we see we have this nice cannon and these barrels set up. So now we have to actually get these things to do something, anything. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and create a new C# script in our scripts folder, and let's just call this cannon, and let that open up in Visual Studio. So if we're thinking about how to go about making a cannon shoot something, then we have to think about the references that Unity makes. So with scripting, how does the computer know what to do? Well, it has to have a reference to the game object that it's trying to manipulate. And to get references to objects, we do that through game object variables. So a variable is just something that you store information with. And a game object variable is just this specific game object type. So we're going to make a new game object variable, and we're going to call it cannon. Alright, so then we're also going to make another game object and call it cannon ball, because the cannon needs something to shoot, and we can't just make something out of nothing. So we need to give the computer something to shoot, so that's why we have another game object. Now the computer doesn't know where to shoot from, so we need to make a spot that it can shoot from. So to do that, we go public transform shot point, and so now we can assign a place for it to shoot from. So it also might be nice if we could control how hard the cannon can shoot. So to do that, we say let's make a public float and call it power. So now we can assign how fast the computer can shoot, or how much power is behind the shot. Let's go ahead and create a public float for turning speed, so that we can aim. So this is how fast we can aim the cannon. And let's create, and I think that should be good, at least for now, for our variables. So let's go ahead and create a new method and call it, let's go ahead and create a public void cannon, or shoot cannon rather, because we can't create a method with the same name as the class. And method is just a script that we can call from other places, and we're going to call this in our update function so that it runs every frame. So now that we have this shoot cannon method in our update frame, so it's going to be called every frame, we have to do something with it. So how does the computer know when we want to shoot? Well, we have to get input from the player. And to do that, we say if input.kick key down, and we go apostrophes, space, because we want to get the space key to shoot. Now you could put whatever key you wanted in there, it just would be that. So now that we have that, we want to instantiate our cannonball, alright, at the shot point. So to do that, we're going to make a temporary game object. So we're going to say game object projectile. So now when we instantiate this, it's going to be under that projectile. And we can say that that projectile is equal to instantiate. And if you don't know, instantiate just means create. We can say instantiate cannonball. And you have to follow exactly what I'm doing here because this is syntax appropriate, like it's case sensitive. So you instantiate your game object, so that's the cannonball. And where do we want to instantiate it? Well, we want to instantiate it at the shot point, and we want to instantiate it at the transform of that shot point, and we want to instantiate it at the position of that transform of that shot point. And since this instantiation takes 3 variables, we want to instantiate our game object, add a position, and what's the rotation of that game object. And since we don't want it to have any rotation, we're just going to say quaternion.identity. And that's just a really fancy way of saying no rotation. So now that we have that, we also want to add force to that game object to make it move. And to do that, we have to use the rigid body type. So we're going to do the same thing, get a temporary rigid body is equal to projectile. So we're getting the projectile that we just got here. Alright, this game object. So this is our instantiated cannonball. So projectile. And we're going to get a component on that, the rigid body component. So what this is doing is it's getting a reference to the rigid body component on our projectile. And now we're going to add a force to that rigid body. So we're going to say RB, which is our rigid body that we just got. And we're going to say add force. And we're going to say shot point dot forward. So this is looking for a direction. So it's looking for like a vector. And so what we're doing now is we're saying shot point. We're getting our shot point transform. And we're saying dot forward. So whatever the relative position of our shot point is, we're going to shoot forward on the z-axis for that. And then we're going to multiply that by the power of our shot. And since we want this to be a shot, we're going to go ahead and say force mode dot impulse. And what that's just a fancy way of saying is getting more force, like make it act like a cannon would shoot. So now that we have that, we don't want these cannonballs cluttering up the scene for a whole lot of time. So we are just going to go ahead and say destroy projectile after 10 seconds. So we're destroying the object, and this is how long we want to destroy it to. If we wanted to destroy it immediately, we could just leave out the 10F. Awesome. So let's go ahead and go back into Unity here. Let's go back into Unity. And it'll go ahead and compile. And we need a cannonball to shoot. So let's go ahead and create a 3D object, create a sphere. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger, maybe like 1.5, 1.5, and 1.5. We can go ahead and apply the cannon material to it just to give it a little bit more fanciness here. And of course, since it's going to be working with physics, we need to apply a rigid body to it. And since we have that, let's just go ahead and drag this into our prefabs folder. It's called cannonball. And let's drag it into our prefabs folder. So now that we have that, go ahead and select our cannon holder. And let's drag our cannon script onto that cannon holder. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and assign some variables in it. So let's just go ahead and drag the cannonball onto our cannonball game object. Let's go ahead and drag our cylinder onto our cannon game object. And let's go ahead and create a shot point to transform. So go ahead and create empty. Go ahead and call it shot point. And I'm just going to add a space in there to make it look nice. Set the rotation on the Y to be 180, and if you go ahead and set this global relative thing to local, you'll see that as we change that, we'll see the rotation change. So just keep that 180. And then we can go ahead and drag that shot point transform in there. Let's go ahead and set some variables for the power. So let's go ahead and set the power to be 25 and the turning speed to be like 0.1. We haven't done anything with the turning speed, but this should do the trick for right about now. So now if we hit play, we'll see that we can shoot cannonballs out from our cannon, but that doesn't do as much good now, does it? Because we can't really aim or anything. So this is awesome. Like, we could move our cannon holder up and stuff, and maybe that would do the trick. But that doesn't really let us control anything. And we're also getting this really weird problem with our prefabs. Okay, so the reason we're getting this problem is because the scale of the platform is so wonky here. So these are child objects of this platform, which has a scale that is really weird. So it's trying to calculate that scale in a lot of weird fashions. So to fix that, we can just unparent those barrels from the platform, and now they won't be doing that weird funky thing. And if we wanted to keep our scene less cluttered as well, we could just go ahead and create a game object, call it barrel holder, and maybe just copy the transform of one barrel, paste the component values in here, set the scale to 1, and parent all the barrels to that barrel holder. So now we should see that these barrels behave like they should, and they don't take up very much space in the scene. So we want this barrel holder back down like at a reasonable spot, or excuse me, the cannon holder. We want this like back down in a space where we can see it in the game view, kind of like that. But we want to be able to aim with it. So to do that, we have to go into our cannon script and make a new method. So we're going to go ahead and create a new public void. And this is just the logic, I think, is I make the methods that are going to be called first on top of each other. So it's just kind of organizational. So let's go ahead and public void and call it aim. And just so we don't forget, just go ahead and call aim in your update function. And just like with the cannon, we're going to need to get some input from the player. So let's go ahead and say input.getKeyDown, or not get key down, get key, because we want to be able to have this not every time we press the button, but if we hold it. And we're just going to go ahead and do this for the W, A, S, and D keys. So if we go ahead and Control C, we can just go ahead and make 4 variables there. So we can say D, A, W, and S for turning right, left, up, and down, respectively. So if we want to mess with the rotation of the cannon, then we have to get a reference to the transform component. And so to do that, we say cannon, and we're getting dot transform, so the transform component, and we're getting the rotation of that object. And we want to say that the rotation is equal to the cannon.transform.rotation times our turning speed. So we can shorten that up, so we can say that it's times equal. So this would be saying that cannon dot, not can edit, cannon dot transform dot rotation times whatever we're going to multiply it by when we're just doing it in shorthand. So we're saying times equal to quaternion, and this is you use quaternions when we mess with rotation, and we're saying dot Euler, which this is just the format, and then you say turning speed. And notice how there's three variables here. So you have your x, y, and z. Since we're turning on the y-axis right now, we need to have the modification be on the y-axis. So we can just go ahead and copy this, Control-C, Control-V, and add just a minus sign in front of that turning speed there to turn left. So now if we go back into Unity, let that compile, and hit play, we should see that we can turn left and right. But this is weird, isn't it? It's just turning the cannon like left and right like that. So what we need to do instead of that cylinder, dragging in that cylinder, is drag in the cannon holder object itself, because this yellow, this y-axis, is up. So now we'll see that we get like a weird funky turning thing, which is cool. It turns right, it turns left and right like it should, because we set that turning speed to be 0.1 earlier. We assigned that value in the inspector. So if you turn this up, you'll get much faster rotation. But let's just go ahead and move these up so that we can turn a little bit more towards the back of the cannon, like a real cannon would. So now if we go ahead and hit play on the game view, we can move a little bit more like a cannon would, like we would expect that to behave. Awesome. So now we can just come back in here, go ahead and Control-C, Control-V, Control-V, and to turn on the W and S, so to turn up and down for the W and S, if we look at this here, we'll see that it's turning on the x-axis. So to turn up, we're going to want to make the x value positive. So W is turning speed, and we don't want that to be the y-axis anymore. We want that to be the x-axis. So we can just go ahead and do the same thing here. Set that to 0f. So 0 float, and turning speed, make that a negative. And now if we go back in here, we might see this working properly. So if we hit W, then it's going up, and if we hit S, it's going down, and we can see we can now just aim this cannon, and we can shoot these balls and they'll fall. So that's all we're going to cover in today's episode of this series. When we come back, we'll work with, say, checking how many barrels we knocked off and making game states so that this is a more playable game. But this is a pretty good start, especially for beginners. So, you guys take care, I'll see you in the next one, and you guys have a great day.